Imagine yourself at an airport, one with far better safety practices than the one that AI has made me hear. Think about all the ways you're taking in information. Maybe you have a paper ticket with departure details or an app that's sending alerts. You might hear conversations around you or announcements overhead. Someone might be traveling with you and chatting. Is there a screen with gate updates and signs pointing the way? Do you see any advertising? Maybe there's a bestseller calling to you from the newsstand. All of this unfolds almost at once, and your ability to thrive depends on your prior skills, such as the languages you speak or your level of literacy. This is an information ecosystem, formed by information flowing between people like you through various means framed around the act of travel. And it's the topic of this episode. Well, not airports specifically, but information ecosystems in general, with Canada as an example. Welcome to the Information Animal Podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Wanless. If this is your first time joining us, this podcast draws on ideas from my book of the same name, but this time we're also drawing from an article I wrote for the Hill Times. In the video version, you'll see all sorts of stupid AI-generated outputs, and you'll sometimes hear them too. I leave what they create in on purpose. Now back to our topic. Information ecosystems have existed as long as humans have been able to communicate, yet they remain poorly understood. It's one of those terms that is often used but seldom defined, and when it is, it can mean something slightly different with each mention. Every field sees information ecosystems through its own lens. A lot of people use information ecosystem to mean the internet or social media. Some might mean news media, and elsewhere it's a stand-in for an organization like a business. Part of the confusion lies in the fact that there are many types of information ecosystems. It can be specific organization or place like an airport where travelers and airport staff share information about flights. Information ecosystems can be virtual, forming between scholars, sharing ideas in written letters across Europe, spawning the Renaissance. They can be closed and controlled like Sparta, leaving mostly just an idea behind of their austerity and fighting prowess. And information ecosystems can be sprawling and diverse, framed by laws and geography like Ukraine. Virtual, big or small, every information ecosystem consists of people, tools, and outputs connected through interrelationships and bound by shared ideas or a concept like a religion, an identity, or nation state. Because they are formed through relationships, information ecosystems are dynamic and constantly changing. Populations fluctuate, skills for processing information shift. Resources shape what tools develop, which in turn changes the types of outputs available. But even in this change, information ecosystems still have shape. All information ecosystems develop over time and build on what came before. Information ecosystems have existed since people learned how to communicate, beginning with gestures. People developed language, a tool they could speak and output to share ideas. And from there, every new tool, like the alphabet, led to more outputs like letters, with each innovation adding more complexity to the information ecosystem where they were introduced. All the way up to today, where so much of our communications relies on the internet and the complex digital system underpinning it, not to mention electricity. Things like language and writing haven't disappeared. They simply remain the basis for most of the means and outputs we have for communicating today. However, the more a society relies upon digital technology to produce, share, and store most of its outputs for nearly every aspect of daily life, the more inherently fragile that information ecosystem becomes.
Wait, did the internet just go out?
Yeah, mine too. What's going on?
That's becoming more apparent with every cloud outage. Cloud services provide computing capabilities, so an organization no longer needs to maintain its own servers. It's a cost-effective solution, but it also means most organizations depend on third parties to function. So when Amazon Web Services go down, so do airlines, banks, governments, and healthcare providers. But the fragility of modern national information ecosystems isn't just due to potential cloud outages. With major geopolitical shifts, sovereignty concerns are arising in countries that depend on technology made elsewhere. Let's take Canada as an example. As a national information ecosystem, Canada is physically huge. It's the second biggest country in the world. That makes maintaining physical infrastructure a challenge and gives our telcos an excuse to charge us exorbitant rates, but I digress. We also famously share the longest undefended border in the world with a neighbor who, let's face it, caused the geopolitical shifts that spawned all the sovereignty woes. Looked at in that context, how sovereign is the Canadian information ecosystem in relation to the United States? Well, Canadians mainly use American Office software, capturing 93% of the market. More than two-thirds of Canadians are on American mobile devices. Elon Musk's Starlink has 500,000 Canadian satellite internet subscribers, mostly in rural or remote areas. Moreover, service providers piggyback on Starlink, including Arctic telcos and Rogers. 4 provinces and 3 territories depend on Starlink for critical services, and others offer rebates to remote residents for it. While Canadian satellites orbit the Earth, we rely on the US to launch them, though Canadian companies are working to change this. A quarter of Canadian domestic internet traffic routes through the US, which is often the fastest path. And Google owns the only trans-Pacific undersea cable connecting Canada. Companies in the UK and Greenland own the 4 across the Atlantic. And when Canadian telcos recently sold stakes in their infrastructure, Blackstone, an American private equity firm whose CEO endorsed Donald Trump, bought into Rogers Communications, one of the big 3 wireless providers. American financing is in Canadian news media, too. While 2.5 million Canadians have nearly no local news, the remaining newspapers are consolidated into a few media empires. Post Media, the biggest newspaper conglomerate, is 2/3 owned by another American firm, Chatham Asset Management, whose CEO is also a Trump supporter. The 4th largest newspaper conglomerate in the United States, Carpenter Media Group, bought another 80-plus local news publications when it purchased Black Press Media in 2024. This includes many newspapers in Canada's Arctic region, an area of particular concern when it comes to sovereignty. While Black Press Media purports to be completely under Canadian control still, Carpenter has been accused in Alaska of bowing to political pressure to intervene editorially. Trump himself is one of the top 5 most popular influencers among Canadian social media users, with Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, and Tucker Carlson. Canadians turn to these influencers for news mostly on American-owned social media sites, or TikTok, which will soon be American-owned too. These shifts introduce quality issues. These influencers also have greater reach than news media, extending across borders. Canadians are also watching American news. 23% watch CNN and 10% watch Fox. American culture seeps in, especially through entertainment. Canadian protesters have confused American laws with our own, which brings us back to the human equation in the national information ecosystem. Forget calls for media literacy. Canada has a literacy problem. Some estimates suggest that half of Canadian adults struggle with literacy. A more recent test indicates that 20% have only a basic reading level. We have similar problems in math. According to the Canada West Foundation, 45% of working-age Albertans do not have the literacy skills required to perform most jobs in today's economy reliably and consistently. And for all the calls for AI sovereignty, do Canadians even have the skills to make use of it? A 2025 study by KPMG and the University of Melbourne ranked us 44 out of 47 countries for AI literacy. All too often, technology is the focus of understanding about information ecosystems. Yet these tools are meaningless if humans do not know how to use them. Yet human ability to use those tools is based on learning derived mostly from outputs produced using those tools. Information ecosystems are complex and dynamic with many overlapping feedback loops. The more people, the more tools, the more outputs, the greater the complexity and thus fragility of information ecosystems. And the Canadian information ecosystem is becoming increasingly complex. The Canadian population is changing, it's becoming more diverse. Immigrants account for 23% of the population, which is the highest it's been since Confederation in 1867. This is something some Canadians are not handling so well, making it another potential vulnerability that others can exploit and have. The tariffs will further strain Canadian social cohesion. Economic uncertainty exacerbates society's ability to cope with these changes. After all, Canadians experiencing financial hardship are more likely to have lower trust in public institutions and the media. Recent economic reports from Canada are grim. The past 12 months have seen very little job growth. Unemployment rose by 6.7%, mostly impacting men aged 25 to 54 and young people aged 15 to 24. According to a recent Research Co survey, Albertan secession is most popular among Canadians 18 to 34 at 42%, with 32% supporting joining the US. It's hard to imagine that a little bit of media literacy is going to change those views. And speaking of Alberta, in a country as large and diverse as Canada, the country might be better understood as a patchwork of information ecosystems. Each province and territory is responsible for its own education system, which in turn shapes young minds differently. Language in Quebec has shaped a very different news media than the rest of the country. Another unique information ecosystem in Canada is that of the Arctic. The power grids in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut are all isolated. Fewer service providers, covering vast distances, aging infrastructure, and extreme weather contribute to outages that may last 12 hours or more. Internet-based communications are especially vulnerable. Power shortages affect most communication services except AM and FM radio, like CBC, which if some southern Canadian politicians had their way would be defunded. Yet CBC North remains the most consistently available media service, providing an estimated half of all non-internet dependent information in the region. For an excellent piece on this, see Ellie Fox's article, The Truth About the CBC in Northern Canada. Failure to see the basic security role the CBC plays in the North is just another example of how poorly understood the Arctic information ecosystem is. Likewise, the needs and well-being of the Inuit, who live in the Arctic, have often been forgotten by the rest of Canada. As of 2023, Indigenous Reserve members represented just 26% of the Canadian Rangers, who, according to the Department of National Defence, play a critical role in the security and sovereignty of remote coastal and northern communities. Yet Indigenous people represent roughly half of the 120,000 people living across the Arctic territories. Moreover, historical defense ramp-ups caused significant harm through forced relocation in the region. Inuit will have many reasons to be skeptical of security measures now, but Inuit are also necessary to Arctic sovereignty. The Canadian information ecosystem is sprawling and diverse, made up of many smaller ecosystems. It is also open to and deeply interconnected with the American information ecosystem. Indeed, we currently depend on considerable amounts of technology and services from American providers. The Canadian information ecosystem is riddled with vulnerabilities, particularly vis-à-vis the United States. While expanding new economic markets for Canada takes precedent, it's obviously not feasible to shore up all these gaps at once, nor are some solutions feasible ever. Does Canada really need its own version of Word? But we do need our citizens to share a vision for our country's future so we can collectively foster sovereignty. Investments into the national information ecosystem, including in technology, should be made with that aim in mind. This is why a bigger strategy is necessary to determine what is needed. After all, it's in the information ecosystem that the Canadian will and ability to defend the country will be mounted, if at all. Strategy is about making the best decisions from among a range of options to achieve an aim. To know what those choices are, be it an investment, legislation, or skills development, a leader must see the bigger picture, and in this case, that is the information ecosystem. That means understanding the relationships between people, technology, and the outputs they consume in relation to conditions like the economy. You can learn more about information ecosystems in my book, The Information Animal, Humans, Technology, and the Competition for Reality. And if you are interested in assessing national information ecosystems, you can find a framework for doing so on the Information Environment Project page at the website for the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. The next episode will explore information competition, so be sure to follow on Substack, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. Thank you for listening to the Information Animal Podcast.